My parents gave me a $3 lottery ticket for Thanksgiving, while they handed my spoiled sister a $17,000 luxury cruise package. They laughed right in my face, calling me a bitter spinster who needed a miracle to afford their lifestyle. But when I scratched that cheap ticket in the bathroom and realized I had just won $150 million, I did not shed a single tear. I just smiled. Weeks later, when they finally discovered the truth and their own massive debts came crashing down, I looked at my phone and saw 89 missed calls. Before I tell you exactly how I dismantled their perfect lives, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family scapegoat who finally fought back. In the affluent circles of Atlanta, image was the only currency my parents valued. My mother Patricia and father Marcus spent their lives cultivating a flawless country club facade. My older sister Chloe was the golden child. She was a beautiful socialite who never worked a day in her life, perfectly content living off our parents' wealth while maintaining a carefully curated online aesthetic. Then there was me. My name is Maya. I am 29 years old and work as an actuary. Because I chose a practical career over marrying into high society, I was branded the family disappointment. My pragmatic nature clashed entirely with their obsession with luxury. This toxic dynamic reached its absolute breaking point last Thanksgiving. The dining room was suffocating under the scent of roasted turkey and expensive perfume. We had just finished dessert when my mother clinked her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. She beamed at the table, her eyes completely bypassing me to land directly on Chloe and her husband Preston. Preston was a white investment broker who loved to parade his perceived superiority over me at every family gathering. He was arrogant, condescending, and carried himself like he owned the entire city. My mother reached into her pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. She handed the thickest one to Chloe. My sister ripped it open and let out an exaggerated shriek that made my ears ring. Inside was a Mediterranean luxury cruise package, complete with first-class flights. I knew exactly how much that specific trip cost because my mother had bragged about it to her friends on the phone the week prior. $17,000. Preston kissed Chloe on the cheek, raising his bourbon to my parents. He thanked them for always treating them so well. Then my mother turned to me. Her warm smile vanished, replaced by a tight obligatory line. She handed me a thin, crumpled envelope that looked like an afterthought. I opened it slowly. Inside sat a single $3 scratch-off lottery ticket. The entire table went dead silent for a brief second before Preston let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He took another slow sip of his bourbon and leaned back in his chair. "A lottery ticket is quite fitting for you, Maya," he sneered. "Honestly, it is probably the only way someone with a boring desk job will ever afford the initiation fee at our country club. You should be grateful your parents are at least giving you a chance to dream big." I felt a familiar heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice perfectly level. I looked directly into his arrogant eyes. "I could easily afford the country club initiation fee myself, Preston. I could have afforded a lot of things if my parents had not drained my education fund, claiming it was a loan to cover the extravagant ice sculptures Chloe absolutely needed to impress Preston. They never paid me back." My mother slammed her glass down on the table, her face flushing with sudden anger. "Maya, you are absolutely unbelievable," she snapped, pointing a manicured finger at me. "You are so bitter and ungrateful. We put a roof over your head for 18 years, and all you do is hold a ridiculous grudge. You simply do not understand what it means to sacrifice for the family. Now stop ruining a beautiful holiday. Take these plates to the kitchen and start washing the dishes. Your sister needs to go home early to start packing for her cruise." Chloe did not even look up from her phone as she chimed in. "Seriously, Maya, learn your place. Just clean the table so we can leave in peace." I stared at a family that viewed me as nothing more than an ATM. I did not argue. I stood up, took my crumpled $3 lottery ticket, and quietly excused myself to the hallway bathroom. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, blocking out the sound of their laughter. I leaned against the cold marble sink, taking a deep breath to steady my shaking hands. I was so tired of being the scapegoat. I looked down at the cheap lottery ticket in my hand. It felt like a physical manifestation of their disrespect. I did not care about the game, I simply needed something to distract myself from the burning anger rising in my throat. Reaching into my purse, I pulled out a quarter. I scratched the silver coating off the first box. The number matched. I scratched the second box. It matched again. I scratched the remaining boxes in rapid succession. Every single number aligned perfectly. I scratched away the final layer of silver dust at the bottom. The words were printed in bold, undeniable black ink, $150 million. I stopped breathing. A strange, icy calm washed over me. I carefully folded the ticket, slipped it securely inside my bra, and smoothed down my dress. "Happy Thanksgiving, family," I whispered to the empty room. I unlocked the heavy bathroom door and walked back out to the dining room, fully prepared to serve them dessert. The morning after Thanksgiving did not find me screaming in my apartment or popping cheap champagne to celebrate. I am an actuary. I calculate risk for a living, and I know exactly what $150 million can do to a family already poisoned by greed and obsession with status. Instead of running directly to the state lottery office to make a public spectacle of myself, I put on my sharpest business suit and drove straight to downtown Atlanta. I sat across a heavy mahogany desk from Miss Evelyn Sterling, the most ruthless wealth management attorney in the city. She did not ask unnecessary questions. She simply listened to my requirements and began sliding the legal paperwork across the table. Within 2 hours, we had established a blind trust named Phoenix Holdings. This financial fortress would claim the massive jackpot entirely anonymously. It was the ultimate shield, keeping my identity hidden from the public and protecting every single cent from the ravenous clutches of my parents and my sister. I was just signing my name on the final trust document when my phone vibrated sharply against the polished wood of the desk. It was a notification from the family group chat. Chloe had sent a long message complaining about the square footage of their standard cruise cabin. Then came the audacious demand. "Maya," she texted Preston, "and I need to upgrade to the VIP Mediterranean suite for this trip. It is only $5,000 more. Wire me the money by noon today so we can lock it in before it sells out." I stared at the bright screen in absolute disbelief. My parents had just handed her a $17,000 vacation on a silver platter the night before, and she was genuinely demanding $5,000 from the sister they humiliated with a $3 scratch-off ticket. I typed a simple, blunt response: "No, I cannot afford to fund your luxury upgrades." Less than 10 seconds later, my phone rang loudly. It was Preston. I answered the call, keeping my voice perfectly flat and devoid of emotion. "Listen to me, you selfish spinster," Preston sneered through the speaker, his arrogant tone dripping with his usual white privilege and entitlement. "Your sister deserves this upgrade for her mental health. You sit in a cubicle doing math all day on a measly actuary salary. You have no husband, no children, and absolutely no life to speak of. The very least you can do is contribute financially to the people who actually have a high social standing to maintain in this city. Stop hoarding your little savings account and transfer the cash immediately." Before I could even formulate a response to his blatant disrespect, I heard a sudden scuffle on the other end of the line. My father, Marcus, abruptly took the phone from his son-in-law. His voice was ice cold, carrying that heavy authoritative weight he always used to force my compliance whenever I dared to step out of line. "Maya, your terrible attitude is becoming a massive problem for this family," my father barked into the receiver. "We are completely exhausted by your constant jealousy of your sister and her successful marriage. Here is exactly how this is going to work from now on. You will transfer the $5,000 to Chloe by tonight, or you can forget about showing up for Christmas dinner next month. In fact, do not bother coming home at all until you learn how to be a supportive and generous sister." I looked down at the freshly signed trust document sitting in front of me, securing my 9-figure fortune. I took a slow, steady breath, feeling an incredible sense of liberation wash over my entire body. "Understood," I replied calmly. I hit the end call button, effectively severing myself from their toxic grip without shedding a single tear. I placed my phone face down on the desk and pushed the finalized paperwork back to Miss Sterling. The $150 million was officially mine. It was untouchable. My first directive as a brand new multimillionaire was swift and decisive. I instructed Miss Sterling to find the most expensive luxury penthouse in the Buckhead district and purchase it immediately in cash under the Phoenix Holdings name. I wanted a literal fortress in the sky, elevated far above the miserable people who thought they could casually toss me out of their lives over a $5,000 demand. My entire life had been defined by what I lacked in their eyes. Now I possessed more wealth and absolute power than they could imagine. By late that afternoon, every local Atlanta news station and social media feed was buzzing excitedly with breaking updates. An anonymous local resident had just stepped forward through a legal trust to claim the massive holiday lottery jackpot. I sat on the plush sofa in my modest apartment, slowly packing my bags to move out when my phone lit up again, breaking the quiet silence of my living room. This time it was my mother, Patricia. I fully expected another harsh lecture about the cruise money, or perhaps another vicious threat about being permanently banned from Christmas. But when I answered the call, her voice was completely unrecognizable. She was not demanding haughty or angry. She was absolutely terrified, sobbing so violently into the phone that she could barely catch her breath. "Maya, please?" My mother gasped into the receiver, her sheer panic echoing loudly through the speaker. "You have to come to the house right now. The bank representatives are here with the authorities. They are taking absolutely everything we own. Preston lost it all. The hedge fund collapsed, and we are facing total financial ruin." I held the phone to my ear, listening to the very people who had discarded me just hours ago now begging for their survival. I closed my eyes, let out a soft, satisfied sigh, and smiled. I drove my reliable sedan up the sweeping cobblestone driveway of my parents' sprawling Atlanta estate. The towering oak trees lining the property cast long, dark shadows over the perfectly manicured lawns. Usually, the grand exterior projected an aura of invincible generational wealth. Today, however, the heavy front doors were wide open, and an undeniable sense of panic spilled out onto the porch. I stepped into the grand foyer and found my entire family gathered in the formal living room. The perfect country club illusion they had spent decades building was shattering right before my eyes. My mother, Patricia, was pacing the expensive Persian rug. Her designer makeup was ruined by streaks of dark mascara, and her hands trembled violently. My father, Marcus, stood by the marble fireplace with a stiff, defensive posture. Chloe and Preston sat on the velvet sofa. Preston was staring at his phone with a deep scowl, while Chloe chewed nervously on her manicured thumbnail. I crossed my arms and waited. My mother finally stopped pacing and looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. She confessed everything in a rushed, panicked breath. They had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on the family mansion several months ago. They did not use the money for luxury renovations or exotic vacations. They used every single cent to quietly bail out one of Preston's failing hedge funds. Preston had assured them it was merely a temporary cash flow issue and promised them exorbitant returns. Instead, the entire fund had officially collapsed that very morning. The bank was already preparing the foreclosure paperwork to seize their home. I looked at Preston. Even now, facing total financial ruin, he refused to drop his arrogant posture. He scoffed and muttered something about unpredictable market fluctuations and unforeseen global risk factors. As an actuary, I knew exactly what a collapsing hedge fund looked like, and I knew it had absolutely nothing to do with bad luck. It was purely bad management and greed. I expected tears. I expected a profound apology for gambling away their secure retirement on a reckless son-in-law. Instead, my father stepped forward and delivered the most insulting proposition I had ever heard in my entire life. "Listen to me, Maya," my father barked, his voice tight with absolute authority. "We have exactly 2 weeks before the bank seizes this property. You need to contact your landlord today and break your apartment lease. You can pack your things and move into one of those cheap motels near the highway. Your mother and I are going to take over your apartment until we can get our finances back in order." I stared at him, trying to process the sheer audacity of his demand. "You want to take my apartment and throw me into a roadside motel?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm. Chloe abruptly stood up from the velvet sofa. "Well, they certainly cannot live with us," she whined, crossing her arms defensively. "Our house is simply too small to host parents, and it would completely ruin our carefully curated aesthetic. Plus, Preston and I are under an enormous amount of stress right now. We need our personal space." My father did not even reprimand Chloe for her blatant selfishness. Instead, he turned his demanding glare back to me. "Furthermore, Maya, you need to contact your financial institution and empty your retirement account immediately. Your sister and Preston are going through a terrible ordeal, and they need cash to maintain their lifestyle while Preston secures a new executive position. You have been hoarding your salary for years. It is time you finally stepped up and contributed to this family." The sheer entitlement radiating from them was utterly suffocating. They had thrown their entire fortune away to pamper my sister and her arrogant husband, and now they expected me to happily sacrifice my home and my life savings to cushion their disastrous fall. I let out a harsh, humorless laugh that cut through the tense room. "I am not breaking my lease, and I am certainly not touching my retirement funds," I stated firmly. "Preston is not a victim of the market. I am an actuary. I run complex risk models for breakfast. I know exactly how his firm operates. His fund was a complete scam from the very start. He overleveraged your money to cover his own terrible debts, and he lost everything. He is not a high-level broker. He is an incompetent fraud." The words hit the room like a violent physical shockwave. Preston turned violently pale, his smug expression vanishing instantly. Before he could even open his mouth to defend himself, Chloe lunged forward. She crossed the Persian rug in 2 rapid strides, raised her manicured hand, and slapped me hard across the face. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the silent living room, ringing in my ears. My head snapped to the side and a hot, stinging pain radiated across my left cheek. "You shut your mouth!" Chloe screamed, her face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. "You are just jealous because Preston is a high-level broker and no man even looks at you. You are a pathetic, bitter spinster who will never have what I have." My mother gasped, but neither she nor my father made a single move to reprimand Chloe. They just stood there silently siding with the golden child, even as she physically assaulted me. I did not raise my hand to strike her back. I did not yell or cry. I slowly turned my head back to face my sister. I reached up and gently touched my stinging cheek. Then I smiled. It was a cold, chilling smile that made Chloe visibly take a step back in fear. "Enjoy your cruise, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "I hope the ocean breeze helps when the bank takes absolutely everything." I turned around and walked out of the grand front doors, leaving them to drown in their own sinking ship. I got into my car and drove away without ever looking in the rearview mirror. That night, I sat on the plush sofa in my apartment and pulled out my phone. I dialed the direct line to my wealth management attorney, Miss Evelyn Sterling. She answered on the first ring, her tone sharp and professional, ready to execute my commands. I gave her one simple, devastating instruction. I authorized Phoenix Holdings to immediately and secretly buy up every single cent of Preston's massive bad debt. By tomorrow morning, I would officially be his sole creditor. By the time the sun rose over Atlanta the next morning, I was officially Preston's sole creditor. Phoenix Holdings had silently swept through the financial markets and purchased every single ounce of his massive toxic debt. I owned him completely, but securing his financial ruin was not enough. I needed to know exactly how deep his corruption went. With virtually unlimited resources at my fingertips, I instructed Miss Sterling to hire the most ruthless corporate investigators in the country. I told her that money was absolutely no object, and I wanted every dark corner of his life exposed. Within a matter of days, a heavily secured courier arrived at my new Buckhead penthouse. He handed me a thick, leather-bound folder filled with the investigator's findings. I sat at my massive marble dining table and opened the file. What I read was even worse than my highly trained actuary mind had calculated. Preston was not just an incompetent broker who made a few bad investments. He was an active calculating criminal. The investigators had uncovered a massive web of wire fraud and embezzlement. He had been stealing money directly from his clients, including the funds from my parents' second mortgage. But he had not lost it in the stock market. The paperwork proved that Preston was fueling a severe and uncontrollable gambling addiction. There were records of massive wire transfers to offshore betting syndicates and high-stakes casinos. Even more sickening was the discovery of a high-maintenance mistress living in Miami. Preston had been using my parents' home equity to lease a luxury beachfront condo for another woman, outfitting her with designer bags and expensive sports cars, while pretending to be the perfect husband in Atlanta. While Preston's disgusting secrets were laid bare across my dining table, my sister was busy living in a complete fantasy world. I walked out onto the expansive wrap-around balcony of my multi-million-dollar penthouse. The city skyline sparkled beneath me. I poured myself a glass of vintage champagne and opened my social media accounts. Chloe was posting non-stop from her Mediterranean cruise. Every hour brought a new barrage of photos and videos. There she was, posing on the sun-drenched deck of the luxury liner, holding a tropical cocktail. There she was showing off her expensive resort wear, while bragging about her perfect white husband and her flawless black elite lifestyle. Her captions were filled with arrogant quotes about how success comes to those who manifest it, and how blessed she was to be married to such a high-level provider. She was completely oblivious to the fact that the man she was kissing in those photos was facing imminent federal prison time, and that her parents were mere days away from total homelessness. I stood on my balcony taking a slow sip of my champagne and watched her digital spectacle with absolute calm. I decided to let them enjoy their final days of fake luxury before gravity took over. A month passed. The lavish cruise ended and Chloe and Preston returned to reality in Atlanta. The looming foreclosure on my parents' mansion was drawing dangerously close, and the deadlines for Preston's massive debts, which were now entirely controlled by my trust, were ticking down rapidly. It was time to make my next move. But before I dropped the final hammer, I decided to give my family one ultimate test. It was a chance for redemption, though I knew exactly how they would respond. I sat on my plush living room sofa and initiated a group phone call to my parents and Chloe. When they answered, I forced my voice to shake. I took shallow, ragged breaths, faking tears and sheer panic. I lied and told them that I had just been laid off from my actuarial firm due to sudden budget cuts. I sobbed into the receiver, claiming that my landlord had refused to grant me an extension, and I was facing immediate eviction by the end of the day. I begged them for help. I specifically begged Chloe, asking if I could just sleep on her couch for 3 days. Just 3 days, until I could figure things out and get back on my feet. The line was silent for a brief moment. Then Chloe laughed. It was not a nervous chuckle, but a loud, vicious laugh that echoed right through the speaker. "Are you out of your mind, Maya?" Chloe sneered, her voice dripping with pure disgust. "My beautiful house is not a homeless shelter. I am not letting you drag your pathetic, desperate energy into my sanctuary. Preston is dealing with a lot of high-level corporate stress right now, and we cannot have a miserable, unemployed spinster crashing on our designer furniture. Preston says losers need to learn the hard way, and it is about time you learned yours." I kept up the act, letting out a pathetic, fake sob. "Mom. Dad, please," I pleaded, trying to sound as broken as possible. "I have nowhere else to go. I just need a tiny bit of help." My father cleared his throat, sounding completely detached. "Maya, you made your bed when you walked out on us at Thanksgiving," he said coldly. "You refused to help your sister when she needed it, so do not expect us to save you now. Your mother and I have our own problems to deal with. Do not call us asking for money." Before I could say another word, the call abruptly disconnected. I looked at my phone. I tried to send a follow-up text, but it immediately bounced back. They had not just hung up on me. Patricia and Marcus had completely blocked my phone number to ensure I could not beg them for a single dime. I lowered the phone to my lap. The fake tears instantly vanished from my eyes, replaced by a terrifying, chilling calm. I stood up and walked over to the floor to ceiling windows, looking out at the city I now practically owned. They had failed the final test with flying colors. I smiled. The trap was now fully and permanently set. The leather armchair in the private cigar lounge of the Buckhead Country Club felt like a vice grip closing around Preston. The room was a sanctuary for the wealthy white elite of the city, smelling strongly of aged oak expensive tobacco and generations of old money. Normally, Preston thrived in this opulent environment, constantly projecting an image of absolute superiority and financial dominance over everyone he encountered. Today, however, he was sweating profusely through his custom-tailored designer suit. He sat across the table from Charles, a senior banking executive practically begging for a massive, unprecedented bridge loan to save himself from a looming federal indictment. Charles took a slow, deliberate sip of his aged scotch. He looked at Preston, not with the warm camaraderie of a fellow investment broker, but with the cold, detached pity strictly reserved for a rapidly sinking ship. Charles set his crystal glass down heavily on the polished mahogany table and folded his hands. He calmly explained that his bank could not extend a single dime of credit to Preston. The financial risk was far too astronomical. More importantly, Charles noted Preston's entire portfolio of toxic debt had already been aggressively purchased by a mysterious single entity overnight. Preston felt all the blood rush straight to his ears. He angrily demanded to know exactly who had the immense capital and the sheer audacity to buy up his failing funds. Charles leaned back in his chair and smiled a thin, humorless smile. He shared that his bank occasionally collaborated with Evelyn Sterling, the most ruthless wealth management attorney in the entire state of Georgia. Through those highly confidential back channels, Charles had learned the true identity of the aggressive new debt buyer. It was a blind trust operating under the name Phoenix Holdings. Charles casually mentioned that it was the exact same legal trust that had just claimed the historic $150 million state lottery jackpot. Preston tightly gripped the armrests of his leather chair, his mind racing frantically. A random lottery winner had purchased his debt. It sounded completely absurd, but it also presented a sudden, desperate opportunity. He leaned forward, begging Charles for a name, a contact number, any piece of information he could use to negotiate his way out of federal prison. He assumed it was some lucky blue-collar worker who would easily fall for a smooth sales pitch from an experienced broker. Charles chuckled softly, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. He told Preston that the CEO of Phoenix Holdings was not some uneducated lottery winner looking for a quick thrill. She was a highly educated, razor-sharp financial actuary. Charles dropped his voice to a conspiratorial volume, mentioning that she was a young black woman native to Atlanta. He frowned slightly, searching his memory for the exact name. Maya, Charles finally said, looking directly at Preston. A brilliant young actuary named Maya. I figured you might know her considering you both operate in the same city. The air completely vanished from Preston's lungs. The upscale country club lounge spun violently around him. His vision blurred, and a sickening wave of nausea violently hit his stomach. Maya. The name echoed repeatedly in his skull like a deafening death knell. The crumpled envelope resting on the Thanksgiving dinner table, the cheap $3 scratch-off ticket, the quiet, unassuming trip to the hallway bathroom, the chilling, terrifyingly calm smile she gave them before walking out of the house. Preston did not even say goodbye to Charles. He bolted from the leather chair, sprinting out of the exclusive club and throwing himself into his luxury car. He drove recklessly through the heavy Atlanta traffic, breaking every single speed limit, until he skidded dangerously onto the cobblestone driveway of his in-laws' estate. He burst through the grand front doors, hyperventilating and drenched in cold, clammy sweat. In the formal living room, Patricia, Marcus, and Chloe were sitting around, casually drinking wine, still loudly complaining about how incredibly ungrateful Maya was for hanging up on them the previous day. Chloe was just whining about how Maya needed to learn her place when Preston shattered their delusion. He screamed at them to shut their mouths. His voice was shrill, completely stripped of its usual arrogant drawl. He stood trembling in the center of the Persian rug and delivered the terrifying truth. The $3 lottery ticket they had openly mocked at Thanksgiving was the jackpot winner. Maya was the anonymous local resident who proudly claimed the $150 million. Maya was the sole proprietor of Phoenix Holdings. Maya fully owned his debt, she owned their mortgage, and she firmly held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. A suffocating, deathly silence crashed down over the vast living room. Patricia dropped her wine glass. It shattered violently against the hardwood floor, spilling dark red liquid that looked exactly like blood. Marcus gripped the edge of the stone mantel, his legs giving out completely beneath him. Chloe stared at her husband with wide, horrified eyes, her mouth opening and closing repeatedly, without producing a single sound. The realization hit them with the destructive force of a freight train. The daughter they had mercilessly abused, the sister they had told to go live in a roadside motel, was a powerful centimillionaire. She was not a struggling actuary begging for a couch to sleep on. She was an apex predator who had just trapped them in a financial cage. Miles away, high above the chaos of the estate, Maya reclined on a heated chair in her private spa. Her phone screen suddenly illuminated the dim room. Notifications rolled in like an avalanche. 10 missed calls, 40 missed calls, 89 missed calls. Text messages flooded the lock screen. Chloe texted first. "My house is your house," Patricia followed. "Call Mom back, we love you." Maya read the lies, smiled peacefully, flipped her phone to silent, and closed her eyes slowly. While I drifted into a peaceful sleep in my rooftop spa, my family was spiraling into absolute chaos. Marcus drove his luxury sedan recklessly through the darker streets of Atlanta, with Patricia and Chloe clutching the leather seats in sheer panic. Preston sat in the back, sweating profusely as he typed out his 50th text message to my silent phone. They pulled up to the curb outside my old apartment building. It was the exact same building Marcus had ordered me to surrender just a month prior. They did not bother finding a parking spot. They left the car idling by the fire hydrant and sprinted up the concrete stairs to the third floor. Chloe pounded her fists against my faded wooden door, screaming my name and begging me to open up. She cried out that they were family and that they desperately needed to talk. The only response she received was the heavy silence of an empty hallway. The commotion eventually drew out my former landlord. He stepped out of his unit, holding a clipboard, and gave them a completely bewildered look. He informed my frantic parents that I had broken my lease and moved out weeks ago. He added that I had paid off the remainder of my contract in crisp $100 bills before handing over the keys and vanishing without a forwarding address. Preston grabbed the doorframe, his chest heaving as the reality of his doom finally set in. His federal deadlines were rapidly approaching. If he did not secure a massive bailout from his primary creditor, within the next 48 hours, he would be indicted for wire fraud and sent to federal prison. The woman he had mocked at Thanksgiving was his only salvation, and she was completely off the grid. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological torture. I instructed my security team to block any unrecognized visitors at the Buckhead penthouse, while I casually planned my wardrobe for the weekend. Preston was rapidly losing his mind. He sat in his dark office staring at a mountain of legal threats when a single notification chimed on his computer. It was a formal email from the office of Evelyn Sterling. The subject line simply read, "Phoenix Holdings." Preston clicked it open with trembling fingers, hoping it was a settlement offer or a payment extension. Instead, it was a cold, calculated press release. The email officially announced that the elusive chief executive officer of Phoenix Holdings would be making her very first public appearance this Saturday night. She was scheduled to attend the annual Black Elite Charity Gala in downtown Atlanta. Preston nearly knocked over his heavy leather desk chair as he frantically leaped to his feet. He immediately called my parents and Chloe, barking aggressive, desperate orders into the receiver. They had an exact time and a confirmed location. They knew exactly where to find me. All they had to do now was get inside that highly secure gala and somehow corner me into signing away my wealth. There was only one massive problem standing in their way. The annual Black Elite Charity Gala was the most exclusive social event of the year, and tickets had sold out 6 months in advance. Even if tickets were available, my family no longer had the financial means to purchase them. Their credit cards were completely maxed out, and their bank accounts were frozen due to the impending foreclosure on their mansion. Desperation breeds absolute humiliation. Patricia walked into a high-end pawn shop located 3 towns over to avoid being recognized by her country club friends. She placed her prized diamond tennis necklace on the glass counter. It was the very same necklace she had worn to Chloe and Preston's wedding. She traded her most valuable possession for a stack of cash just to buy 4 black market tickets from an aggressive ticket scalper. They spent the entire car ride to the gala, frantically rehearsing their grand performance. Marcus instructed Patricia to cry the moment she saw me. He told her to grab my hands and wail about how worried sick they had been. Preston told Chloe to apologize for the slap and to play the role of the terrified, helpless sister facing ruin. They genuinely convinced themselves that I was still the same desperate, eager to please girl who craved their validation. They believed they could effortlessly manipulate me through the sheer power of blood ties and public pressure. The gala was in full swing by the time they slipped through the service entrance and merged with the affluent crowd. The grand ballroom was dripping in gold accents and crystal chandeliers, illuminating the most powerful figures in Atlanta high society. My family stood near the back of the room, frantically scanning the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Suddenly, the gentle hum of the string quartet faded into the background. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase swung open. The entire room went completely still. I stepped into the bright light. I was draped in a custom emerald green couture gown that swept beautifully across the polished marble floor with every single confident step I took. Around my neck rested a vintage diamond and emerald collar, worth significantly more than the entire estate. My parents were about to lose forever. I held my head high, radiating an aura of absolute untouchable power and unbothered grace. I was no longer the forgotten actuary hiding in the dark corner. I was the billionaire queen of the city. Preston spotted me first. He immediately tapped Chloe on the shoulder and pointed a shaking finger toward the staircase. Their eyes widened with a sudden mixture of raw terror and ravenous greed. Without missing a beat, Patricia activated her fake tears, like a pack of starving wolves catching the scent of their ultimate prey. My entire family began to aggressively push their desperate way through the elegant crowd, charging straight toward me. I watched them aggressively shove past local politicians and corporate executives just to get to me. Patricia reached me first. She threw her arms wide open and forced a steady stream of fake dramatic tears down her cheeks. "My baby," she wailed loudly, making sure the event photographers were capturing her performance perfectly. "We were so incredibly worried about you, Maya. We have been looking everywhere for you. We just want you back home safely with us." She lunged forward, trying to pull me into a tight embrace to cement her perfect mother routine in front of the cameras. I did not even flinch. I smoothly took a single step back and gave a slight nod. 2 massive security guards wearing tailored black suits immediately stepped between us. They formed an impenetrable human wall, blocking my mother from touching my custom gown. Patricia stumbled back in shock, her fake tears instantly drying up as she glared at the imposing guards. Before she could complain, Preston slickly maneuvered his way around her. He adjusted his silk tie and flashed me his signature arrogant smile, completely ignoring the reality of his impending federal doom. He tried to corner me against the grand staircase, leaning in close to present what he clearly thought was a brilliant business proposal. "Maya, it is so incredibly good to see you," Preston said, his voice dripping with false warmth and condescension. "Listen, I know we have had our minor misunderstandings recently, but we are family. Let us put the past behind us. I heard about your little windfall, and I am here to help you. You are just a numbers girl, Maya. You play it safe. You need a real broker, a seasoned professional to handle this kind of staggering wealth. I can manage your entire portfolio and protect you from people who might want to take advantage of you. I stared at this arrogant white man who was hours away from federal prison, offering to manage my fortune. The sheer audacity of his delusion was almost impressive. He genuinely believed that his skin color and his gender meant I would simply hand over $150 million to him without asking a single question. I threw my head back and laughed out loud. It was a rich, booming laugh that carried over the soft classical music filling the ballroom. Preston looked around nervously, his confident smile faltering as wealthy guests turned to stare at us. "Manage my money?" I asked, my voice projecting clearly across the polished marble floor. "You want to manage my wealth, Preston?" I raised my right hand and caught the eye of the lead technician in the audio-visual booth overlooking the ballroom. I had donated a very generous $2 million to this charity earlier in the week, and that donation came with a few minor technical requests. The technician gave me a quick thumbs up and flipped a heavy switch. The gentle string quartet music abruptly cut out. The grand ballroom fell completely silent. All eyes turned toward the massive digital screens flanking the main stage, which were supposed to be displaying a promotional video for the charity. Instead, the high-definition screens lit up with Preston's heavily redacted financial statements. A collective gasp rippled through the hundreds of elite guests. I had the technicians highlight the exact amounts in bright red text. There was the absolute proof of his massive offshore gambling debts. There were the extensive wire transfers embezzling money from his own clients. There were the documents proving he had drained my parents' home equity to completely fund his secret life. And then came the photographs. Crystal clear, high-resolution images flashed across the massive screens showing Preston on a private yacht in Miami. He was not with Chloe. He was wrapped around his high-maintenance mistress, showering her with expensive gifts paid for by the family he claimed to care about. The entire charity gala went dead silent. The only sound in the massive room was the low hum of the projectors broadcasting his crimes to the most powerful people in the city. Chloe let out a blood-curdling scream. Her face turned ghost white as she stared up at the screens, watching her perfect illusion of a flawless high society marriage burn to absolute ashes. She spun around and began hitting Preston, her fists pounding against his chest as she shrieked hysterically. Preston panicked. His eyes darted around the room, realizing that his reputation, his career, and his freedom were completely destroyed. He lunged forward, trying to aggressively grab my arm to stop the presentation. He never even made contact. Before his fingers could brush my skin, my security detail moved with terrifying speed. One guard grabbed Preston by the wrist, twisted his arm sharply behind his back, and slammed him face first onto the polished marble floor. The sickening thud of his body hitting the stone echoed through the silent ballroom. I slowly walked over and looked down at the man who had tormented me for years. He was pinned to the floor, panting heavily and completely humiliated in front of the entire city. The heavy silence that followed my pointed question was deafening. No one in the ballroom dared to move or breathe. Preston lay right there, defeated and broken, his arrogant facade utterly shattered. I looked up at my mother and father. They were frozen in terror, unable to comprehend the absolute destruction of their carefully crafted world. I felt a profound sense of closure wash over my entire being. I had finally taken back my power. I was no longer the family scapegoat or the forgotten sister. I was the architect of their downfall, and every single second of this reckoning felt absolutely incredible. "Is this exactly how you plan to manage my money, Preston?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "Is this exactly the same way you managed my parents straight into foreclosure?" The deafening silence in the grand ballroom was abruptly shattered by a piercing, hysterical shriek. Chloe stood frozen for just a fraction of a second, before her entire carefully curated high society facade completely imploded. She did not fall to her knees in despair over the high-definition photographs of her husband embracing his Miami mistress. She did not weep over the devastating betrayal of her marriage vows. In true narcissistic fashion, the only thing Chloe cared about was her rapidly evaporating wealth. She charged forward, her designer heels clicking frantically against the polished marble floor until she stood towering over Preston, who was still firmly pinned to the ground by my security team. "You stupid, incompetent fool!" Chloe screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with pure, raw panic. She began kicking at his expensive tailored suit, entirely oblivious to the hundreds of smartphones actively recording her spectacular meltdown. "You gambled away our entire fortune, Preston. You lied to me. You told me we were richer than everyone in this room, and now you are going to federal prison. What am I supposed to do now? I cannot be seen walking around Atlanta as the broke wife of a convicted felon. My friends will laugh at me. I will lose my country club membership. I will lose absolutely everything." Preston groaned against the cold stone floor, unable to defend himself or even look his furious wife in the eye. Finding no comfort from the man who had just destroyed her life, Chloe violently spun around to face me. Her eyes were completely unhinged, wild with a desperate, ravenous entitlement that made my stomach turn. She marched right up to the invisible line my security guards had formed, her chest heaving as she pointed a shaking manicured finger directly at my face. "You have to fix this!" "Maya," Chloe demanded, her voice echoing shrilly across the cavernous ballroom. "You have $150 million sitting in the bank. You have to pay off his massive debts right now. If he goes to jail, I lose my entire luxurious lifestyle. I cannot work a regular job, Maya. I am not built for that. You have to write a check and make this entire scandal disappear. You owe me. You are my sister and you are obligated to protect me." I stared at the woman who had happily slapped my face just a few weeks prior. I looked at the golden child who had relentlessly mocked my practical career choices and demanded I fund her Mediterranean cruise while I sat in my supposed misery. Every single camera flash capturing this monumental downfall felt like pure vindication. The extravagant charity gala had transformed into a spectacular theater of justice. The elite guests who had previously ignored me were now staring in absolute awe at the woman controlling the entire room. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. My absolute silence held far more power than her frantic screaming ever could. I took a slow, deliberate sip from my crystal champagne flute, keeping my eyes locked dead onto hers. "My bank account is not a homeless shelter, Chloe," I said, my voice perfectly smooth and chillingly calm, carrying effortlessly over the stunned murmurs of the elite crowd. "Preston says losers need to learn the hard way, and it is about time you learned yours." The exact words she had mercilessly spat at me over the phone when I begged for a place to sleep hit her with the brutal force of a physical blow. Chloe gasped, stepping back as if the air had been violently knocked out of her lungs. Her jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. She finally realized that the helpless, eager-to-please sister she had bullied for decades was completely dead and buried. Sensing that their golden child was utterly defeated, Marcus and Patricia frantically rushed forward. The crushing weight of their ultimate social destruction was finally dawning on them. The most prominent politicians, banking executives, and socialites in Atlanta were standing in a wide circle around us, whispering and pointing. My parents' pristine legacy was burning to ash in front of the very people they worshipped. "Maya, please," Patricia begged, her voice trembling with genuine terror as she clasped her hands together in a desperate pleading motion. "Stop doing this. You have made your point. You have proven that you are smarter and richer than all of us. But you have to stop this presentation immediately. You are publicly ruining the family reputation. We can never show our faces in this city again." Marcus pushed past his weeping wife, trying to muster whatever remaining shred of fatherly authority he still possessed. His face was pale and slick with nervous sweat. "Maya, you must call off your security team and tell your lawyers to stand down," Marcus pleaded desperately. "We raised you. We put a roof over your head. We are your blood. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. Just write the check to clear your brother-in-law of these charges so we can handle this massive crisis quietly behind closed doors. Save this family from total public humiliation before it is too late. I looked at the two people who had gleefully drained my college savings to fund a fake opulent lifestyle. I looked at the parents who had ordered me to break my apartment lease and move into a cheap highway motel just to shield themselves from their own spectacular financial incompetence. They were not sorry for a single thing they had done to me. They were only sorry that the entire city was currently watching them drown. I turned slightly and extended my right hand. Miss Evelyn Sterling, who had been standing silently in the shadows just behind me, stepped into the light. She placed a sleek, heavy black leather folder directly into my open palm. I looked back at my sweating, trembling father and offered him a devastating, radiant smile. I slowly opened the sleek black folder and pulled out a stack of crisp, heavily notarized legal documents bearing the official seal of Phoenix Holdings. Save the family reputation. I asked, my voice echoing with final absolute authority across the dead silent ballroom. I already bought the banknote on your sprawling mansion, Dad. I am officially your sole landlord, and as of tomorrow morning you are completely evicted. The devastating weight of my words dropped over the grand ballroom like a physical shockwave. For a split second, nobody moved or breathed. Then the absolute chaos erupted. Whispers violently tore through the crowd of Atlanta high society elites as hundreds of smartphone cameras simultaneously flashed, capturing the exact moment my parents' pristine social standing was instantly vaporized. The prominent politicians and wealthy executives they had spent decades desperately trying to impress were now staring at them with unfiltered disgust. The flawless illusion of their generational wealth was completely shattered, leaving nothing but the pathetic reality of their financial ruin exposed for the entire city to witness. Preston was still groaning on the cold marble floor, his expensive tailored suit twisted and ruined. The charity event security team did not offer him a single ounce of grace. Two massive guards hoisted him up by his arms and aggressively frog-marched him toward the heavy service doors at the back of the ballroom. Chloe chased frantically after them, her custom designer gown dragging awkwardly across the floor as she shrieked hysterically. She clawed at the air, demanding that someone stop them, demanding that I write a check and save her luxurious lifestyle from evaporating. Her shrill voice echoed wildly, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers, until the heavy doors slammed shut behind her, cutting off her frantic screams and erasing her from the gala entirely. Marcus and Patricia were left standing entirely alone in the center of the vast room. The wealthy guests who used to flock to them had instinctively taken several steps back, treating my parents like they carried a highly contagious disease. They were completely isolated, humiliated, and stripped of every single ounce of their fabricated dignity. Patricia looked at the sleek black folder in my hand, her face trembling with a potent mixture of raw terror and disbelief. She took a hesitant step forward, reaching out a shaking hand as if she could somehow rewind time and undo decades of psychological abuse. "Maya, please, Patricia," wept, her voice cracking under the crushing pressure of her spectacular downfall. "You cannot possibly do this to us. We are your parents. We raised you. We fed you and put clothes on your back. We gave you everything you needed to become the successful woman you are today. You owe us your respect and your gratitude, not this terrible public humiliation." I did not back away from her trembling hand. I stood my ground, radiating the absolute untouchable power of a woman who had meticulously orchestrated her own liberation. I looked directly into her desperate, crying eyes and let out a soft, cold laugh that made her flinch. "You did not give me anything, Mother," I stated, my voice perfectly level and projecting clearly for every elite guest to hear. "You took from me. When I was accepted into my master degree program, you and Dad secretly drained $70,000 from my college savings account. You told me it was a necessary sacrifice for the family. You used my hard-earned education funds to pay for the extravagant ice sculptures and imported caviar at Chloe and Preston wedding, just so you could impress the very people who are currently laughing at you. Marcus swallowed hard, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. That was a long time ago, Maya, he stammered weakly. We were going to pay you back when the market stabilized, and I just collected my repayment with extreme interest. I replied smoothly, tapping the black folder against my palm. I bought your bad debt. I bought the banknote on your sprawling mansion. I own the walls you sleep in and the roof over your head. I do not owe you a single ounce of respect or gratitude, because I bought my freedom in cash. You made your choices and now you are going to face the brutal consequences. I turned my back on them, signaling to my security detail that the conversation was officially over. I did not wait to hear their pathetic excuses or their desperate pleas for mercy. I walked away with my head held high, my posture immaculate, and my spirit completely unbothered. The sea of wealthy guests naturally parted for me, creating a wide, respectful path toward the grand exit. Politicians who had ignored me an hour ago now nodded in deep reverence. Powerful executives stepped aside, looking at me with pure awe and newfound terror. I had walked into the charity gala as the forgotten sister, but I was leaving as the undeniable billionaire queen of Atlanta. I stepped through the heavy glass doors and out into the crisp, cool night air. My security team escorted me down the grand steps toward my waiting custom Maybach. The driver opened the heavy door and I slid into the plush leather back seat. I leaned my head back against the soft headrest, closed my eyes, and finally breathed in the incredibly sweet, intoxicating air of absolute freedom. The heavy chains of my toxic family had been completely shattered. The next morning, the sun rose brightly over the sprawling family estate. Marcus and Patricia stood on their pristine front lawn, shivering in the brisk dawn air, surrounded by hastily packed garbage bags filled with their designer clothes. They watched in horror as a fleet of massive heavy-duty trucks rumbled loudly up their sweeping cobblestone driveway. But the vehicles pulling up to the property were not moving trucks hired to transport their remaining furniture into storage. They were not landscaping vehicles arriving to maintain the manicured gardens. They were massive yellow bulldozers and heavy excavators. It was a fully equipped commercial demolition crew, and they were parking directly in front of the grand mansion. The foreman stepped out holding a clipboard. He walked right past my weeping parents, completely ignoring their frantic questions. He unrolled the blueprints authorized by Phoenix Holdings. Their perfect historic palace was officially scheduled to be leveled into dust before noon. The morning sun cast long, harsh shadows over the sweeping cobblestone driveway of the estate. The massive yellow bulldozers sat idling loudly, sending thick plumes of diesel exhaust into the crisp Atlanta air. Marcus and Patricia stood on the pristine front lawn, trembling in their silk pajamas. They had spent decades cultivating an image of invincible wealth, but right now, they looked absolutely pathetic. Miss Evelyn Sterling stood on the marble porch, flanked by 2 armed security contractors and several local law enforcement officers. She held a thick stack of legal foreclosure documents outlining the immediate seizure of the property. My parents were not given the luxury of calling moving companies or hiring professional packers. Miss Sterling handed them a box of heavy-duty black plastic garbage bags and gave them exactly 1 hour to gather whatever basic necessities they could carry. Patricia dropped to her knees on the expensive Persian rug, weeping hysterically as she shoved her custom designer dresses and expensive Italian shoes into the cheap plastic bags. Marcus frantically paced the grand foyer, clutching his cell phone. He dialed the president of his exclusive country club, begging for a temporary loan, or just a place to stay for the weekend. The call went straight to voicemail. He dialed his closest banking associates, his golf partners, and the politicians he had funded for years. Every single call was ignored. They were completely radioactive. The news of the charity gala had spread through the elite circles like wildfire, and nobody wanted to be associated with disgraced frauds. They were official social pariahs stripped of everything they valued. As the strict hour expired, the security team firmly escorted them out the grand front doors. They dragged their garbage bags down the driveway, passing the heavy demolition equipment that was waiting to erase their legacy from the earth. While my parents were being humiliated on their front lawn, a much more severe reckoning was unfolding in Midtown Atlanta. Preston was locked inside his sleek corner office, frantically feeding years of forged financial records into a heavy-duty shredder. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, and his face was slick with cold, terrified sweat. He was desperately trying to log into his offshore accounts to salvage whatever stolen money he could find, but every single screen flashed a bright red access denied error. The anonymous financial trails I had meticulously compiled and submitted to the authorities had perfectly trapped him. The heavy glass doors of his firm suddenly swung open. Dozens of federal agents wearing dark jackets with bold yellow lettering swarmed the entire floor. Preston froze as the heavy office door was kicked open. Two agents grabbed him aggressively, pinning his arms firmly behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked sharply around his wrists, echoing loudly in the quiet office. The lead agent loudly read him his rights, listing out the extensive charges of wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and massive financial evasion. Preston was forcefully marched through the crowded lobby of his firm, while his colleagues watched in absolute stunned silence. He had spent his entire career acting like a superior, untouchable force, but he was leaving the building as a common criminal heading straight for a federal holding cell. Across town, Chloe was experiencing her own spectacular freefall into absolute misery. With Preston arrested and his assets completely frozen by the federal government, her precious black credit cards were declining at every single establishment. She had dragged her heavy designer luggage out of their upscale neighborhood before the bank officials arrived to seize the property. Now she found herself standing on the cracked, dirty sidewalk of a cheap highway motel on the absolute outskirts of the city. It was the exact same filthy, rundown establishment she and my father had ordered me to move into just a month prior. Chloe stared at the flickering neon vacancy sign, her flawless socialite facade completely shattered. The damp air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cleaning chemicals. She dragged her expensive suitcases up the metal staircase to her dingy room. The carpet was stained and the walls were peeling. Chloe sat on the edge of the sagging mattress and finally broke down. She had no husband to fund her lifestyle, no parents to rescue her, and no country club friends who would ever speak to her again. She was completely stripped of her fake wealth and forced to live the exact miserable life she had so casually wished upon me. But Chloe was not ready to accept her new reality. Her despair quickly morphed into a frantic, manic desperation. She knew I was the only person left in the entire world who possessed the massive wealth she craved. She opened her designer suitcase and pulled out one of her last remaining luxury handbags. She marched down to a local pawn shop and traded the expensive bag for a thick stack of untraceable cash. Chloe used the cash to bribe a high-end delivery driver who frequently serviced the wealthy Buckhead district. She paid him handsomely to reveal the exact address of the luxury penthouse newly acquired by Phoenix Holdings. Fueled by sheer panic and absolute entitlement, Chloe arrived at my towering glass building. She waited in the dark shadows near the loading dock until a distracted maintenance worker opened a side door. She slipped past the lobby security team completely unnoticed and sneaked into the service corridor. Chloe bypassed the main reception and found the private, secure elevator bank reserved exclusively for the penthouse owner. Her hair was severely disheveled, her designer clothes were wrinkled, and her eyes were wild with manic desperation. She stood right outside my private elevator doors, pacing back and forth like a trapped animal, waiting in the shadows to make one final desperate plea. The golden child of the family was now absolutely nothing but a cornered beggar, completely at my ultimate mercy and waiting for me to arrive home. The end approached. The private elevator gave me a quiet moment to decompress. I stood in the mirrored carriage wearing a tailored cream pantsuit, detached from the absolute destruction my parents and Preston were facing. The soft chime echoed as the elevator reached the penthouse. The steel doors slid open. I fully expected to step into my quiet private foyer today. Instead, I was met with a jarring, horrifying sight. Crouching in the dim shadows of the private corridor, looking like a terrified animal, was my older sister. The golden child of Atlanta was completely unrecognizable. Chloe wore a wrinkled, stained tracksuit. Her expensive hair extensions were matted and tangled. Her designer makeup was smeared down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks from hours of hysterical crying. She had bypassed lobby security and bribed her way up. Before my personal security guard could even step out of the elevator carriage to intercept her, Chloe aggressively lunged forward. She did not raise her hand to slap me this time. She did not yell insults or demand that I respect her authority. Instead, Chloe collapsed hard onto the polished marble floor, landing directly at my expensive heels. She grabbed the fabric of my trousers, sobbing with a pathetic, manic desperation that made my skin crawl. "Maya, please, you have to help me," Chloe wailed, her voice cracking under the sheer weight of her pathetic reality. "I have absolutely nothing left. The bank seized my accounts. Preston is going to federal prison, and my friends will not even answer my phone calls. I am living in a filthy cheap motel. You have $150 million, Maya. It is absolutely nothing to you. Just give me $1 million. Just 1 million so I can start over and get my life back." I looked down at the woman who had tormented me for my entire existence. I did not feel a single ounce of rage or hatred. I just felt a profound, chilling emptiness. I gently stepped back, forcing her hands off my clothing. I looked at her tear-stained face and remembered every single moment of sheer cruelty she had inflicted upon me. $1 million, I asked, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sisterly affection. "You think you are entitled to $1 million of my money just because we share the same bloodline?" Chloe scrambled to her knees, nodding frantically. "Yes, Maya, we are sisters," she begged, her voice trembling with false hope. "We are family. I promise I will pay you back. I will do whatever you want." I slowly shook my head. "Family does not act the way you acted, Chloe," I stated firmly, looking her dead in the eye. "Let us take a quick trip down memory lane. Just a few weeks ago, we sat at the Thanksgiving dinner table. Mom and Dad handed you a luxurious $17,000 Mediterranean cruise package. You gloated. You bragged about your flawless high society life and your perfect wealthy husband. Then they handed me a crumpled envelope containing a cheap $3 lottery ticket. They humiliated me in front of the entire family. And what did you do, Chloe? You laughed. You told me to learn my place and demanded that I wash your dirty dishes so you could pack for your extravagant vacation. You told me that my bank account was not a homeless shelter when I begged you for a place to sleep. You told me that losers need to learn the hard way. Chloe covered her face with her trembling hands, sobbing loudly as her own vicious words were repeated back to her. I crouched down slightly, bringing my face level with hers. You spent your entire life hoarding the affection and the wealth of our parents, I said, my voice dropping to a terrifyingly soft whisper. You won the genetic lottery with Mom and Dad. They gave you absolutely everything and left me to starve. But I won the actual lottery, Chloe. I won the $150 million. We are finally entirely even. And I am not giving you a single dime to fund your delusion. I stood back up and gave a brief, sharp nod to my personal security guard. He immediately stepped forward and grabbed Chloe firmly but gently by the arms, lifting her off the polished marble floor. "No, Maya, please," Chloe shrieked, thrashing weakly against the massive guard. "You cannot leave me like this. I will die out there. I am your sister." The guard expertly dragged the sobbing, broken woman toward the heavy service elevator. I watched her disappear behind the closing steel doors, her hysterical screams fading into nothingness. I turned around and walked into my spectacular penthouse. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. I just felt an overwhelming, absolute sense of closure. The toxic infection that had plagued my entire life was finally permanently excised. I walked through the sun-drenched living room and stepped into my massive home office, which offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk and took a deep, cleansing breath. A moment later, The heavy oak doors to my office swung open. Miss Evelyn Sterling walked in, carrying a thick stack of freshly printed legal papers. She wore a confident, knowing smile. "The family has been entirely neutralized," Miss Sterling reported, setting the documents down on my desk. "Marcus and Patricia are officially evicted, and Preston has been denied bail. The entire city knows exactly who you are, and nobody will ever dare cross you again." I looked down at the pristine legal documents. The revenge was perfectly executed, but I was not finished yet. I looked up at my ruthless attorney with a bright, ambitious smile. "The family is handled," I said firmly, "but now I have one more massive move to make with my wealth. It is time we change the entire system." I sat at my massive mahogany desk, watching the steel elevator doors close on my sister for the final time. The absolute silence of the penthouse wrapped around me like a warm, comforting embrace. Miss Sterling walked into my office and placed the final stack of legal documents right in front of me. The toxic infection of my past was neutralized, but hoarding wealth was never my ultimate goal. It was time to build a brand new empire and completely change the corrupt system that had allowed arrogant men like Preston to thrive, while hardworking women like me were consistently pushed to the margins. A few months later, I stood on a brightly lit stage in the center of downtown Atlanta, cutting a thick emerald silk ribbon with oversized golden scissors. The crowd erupted into deafening applause as I officially launched the Vanguard Initiative. It was a $20 million scholarship and venture capital fund designed specifically for Black women in science, technology, engineering, and finance who lacked support. I looked out at the sea of brilliant, ambitious young women who had been told their entire lives that they were simply not enough. I was giving them the exact financial fortress my parents had aggressively tried to deny me. I was funding their dreams, their groundbreaking startups, and their absolute independence. While I was empowering the next generation of financial leaders, my biological family was receiving a brutal education in reality. Preston was no longer wearing custom-tailored Italian suits or sipping aged bourbon in exclusive country club lounges. He was currently sitting in a stark, freezing concrete federal holding cell, wearing a scratchy, bright orange jumpsuit. The absolute arrogance that defined his privileged existence was stripped away. He was surrounded by hardened criminals and facing a mandatory 15-year sentence for his massive wire fraud and corporate embezzlement schemes. His undeniable white privilege could not save him from the undeniable mathematical proof I had handed directly to the federal investigators. He was broken and entirely alone. Chloe was experiencing an entirely different brand of psychological torture. Stripped of her limitless black credit cards and her fake high society status, she was forced to seek actual employment just to survive. The former golden child of Atlanta was now wearing a poorly fitted polyester uniform, working a grueling minimum wage retail job at a local discount department store. She spent her days folding cheap sweaters and being yelled at by demanding customers. Every time she scrubbed scuff marks off the fitting room floors, she was forced to remember demanding $1 million from me to save her luxurious aesthetic. There were no Mediterranean luxury cruises in her future, only exhausting double shifts and aching feet. Marcus and Patricia had suffered the most spectacular social death imaginable. The bank seized their sprawling mansion and auctioned off their designer furniture to cover astronomical debts. They were now forced to live in a cramped, dingy one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. The thin walls offered absolutely no protection from the loud noise of the busy street outside. Stripped of their wealth and elite country club friends, they had nothing left to distract them from their own miserable company. They spent their days sitting in a tiny kitchen, bitterly screaming at each other and constantly blaming one another for their spectacular downfall. The perfect illusion they had sacrificed my college fund to maintain was completely eradicated. I was walking through the grand lobby of the Vanguard Initiative headquarters, feeling an overwhelming sense of purpose and profound peace when my private cell phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out and looked at the bright digital screen. It was an unknown number calling from a local Atlanta area code. I rarely answered unknown calls, but a strange, powerful instinct told me to accept this one. I swiped the screen and pressed the phone to my ear, keeping my voice completely neutral as I answered. Maya. My mother gasped into the receiver, her voice cracking with violent, heavy sobs. Oh, my sweet baby girl, please do not hang up the phone. It is Mom. I stopped walking. I did not feel a spike of anxiety or a sudden rush of bitter anger. I just stood in the sunlit lobby listening to the pathetic sound of a woman who had completely destroyed her own life. Maya, I am so incredibly sorry. Patricia wept heavily, her breath hitching with genuine desperate agony. I finally understand. I understand everything now. Your father and I have lost absolutely everything. We are living in a nightmare and have nobody left. We were so blinded by the money and the status in the country club that we completely failed you. You were the only one who actually worked hard, and we treated you terribly. Please, Maya, I am begging you on my hands and knees. Just give us one more chance to be a real family. I promise I will change. I listened silently to her frantic, desperate apology. Years ago, those exact words would have brought me to my knees. I would have cried and forgiven her instantly just to feel the warmth of a motherly embrace. But the woman standing in the grand lobby of a $20 million foundation was no longer that desperate, unloved girl. I built my own fortress and did not need her empty validation to survive. I forgive you, I said, my voice perfectly smooth and carrying absolutely zero malice, but I never want to see you again. I did not wait for her to scream or beg or try to negotiate. I pulled the phone away from my ear and calmly pressed the end call button. I walked over to a large metal trash can near the heavy glass entrance doors. I dropped the expensive smartphone directly into the dark garbage and walked out into the bright, warm Atlanta sun, feeling completely ready to buy a brand new one today. The morning sun felt entirely different now. Walking away from that trash can felt incredible. My biological family was erased from my existence, and I had zero intentions of looking back. But true power is not just about dismantling the people who tried to destroy you. It is about actively uplifting the people who held you together when you were completely broken. I immediately headed to a small independent coffee shop in Midtown to meet Nia. Nia was the only person who consistently supported me during my grueling years as a struggling actuary. When my parents were busy draining my savings accounts and demanding I conform to their toxic country club standards, Nia was the one showing up at my tiny apartment with cheap takeout and endless encouragement. I sat across from her at a small corner table and slid a sleek manila envelope toward her. Nia looked at me with confusion as she opened the flap and pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a formal bank statement confirming that her massive, crushing mountain of student loan debt had been completely paid off in full. Every single cent was wiped out, zeroed out, by a direct wire transfer from Phoenix Holdings. Nia dropped the paper on the table, her hands shaking wildly, as tears immediately flooded her eyes. Before she could even attempt to formulate a sentence, I slid a second document across the table. It was a high-level executive employment contract. I told her I was officially appointing her as the executive director of the newly established Vanguard Initiative. I needed someone with a flawless moral compass to help distribute $20 million to ambitious young Black women, and I trusted nobody more than her. Nia lunged across the small table, pulling me into a genuine tight embrace. This was my chosen family, and I was making sure she would never have to struggle another day in her life. With Nia securely by my side, I turned my focus back to the corporate world. It was time to settle one final professional score. I called my private driver and directed him to the towering glass skyscraper that housed my former actuarial firm. Just 2 months ago, I was working 60-hour weeks in that exact building, slaving over complex risk models, while being constantly overlooked and severely undervalued. I stepped out of the Maybach wearing a sharp-tailored crimson power suit and walked straight through the heavy revolving doors. I did not bother stopping at the reception desk to sign in. I bypassed the security gates with absolute unyielding authority and marched directly to the executive suite on the top floor. I pushed open the heavy glass doors to the corner office without knocking. Sitting behind the massive oak desk was Richard, my former managing director. Richard was an incredibly arrogant man who had spent the last 4 years actively taking credit for my brilliant analytical work while consistently passing me over for well-deserved promotions. He looked up from his computer screen, his face twisting into an immediate scowl of deep annoyance. He arrogantly demanded to know why a former employee was trespassing in his private office and threatened to call building security to have me forcefully removed. I did not flinch. I slowly walked over to his desk, pulled out a leather chair, and sat down, making myself completely comfortable. I smiled brightly and informed him that he could certainly try to call security, but they would not answer to him anymore. I opened my briefcase and dropped a bound legal portfolio onto his keyboard. I watched his eyes scan the bold text on the cover sheet. I calmly explained that Phoenix Holdings had spent the entire weekend aggressively acquiring shares through a series of quiet corporate buyouts. As of 9 o'clock this morning, I was officially the majority shareholder and the sole owner of the entire firm. Richard turned a sickening shade of pale gray. He stammered and stuttered desperately, trying to backtrack and suddenly praise my past performance. I raised my hand and completely silenced him. I told him to pack up his expensive golf clubs and get out of my building immediately, because he was officially fired without severance. I did not stop there. I spent the next 3 hours systematically purging the entire executive floor. I fired every single toxic manager who perpetuated the hostile boys' club culture. Once the dead weight was entirely cleared out, I initiated a massive corporate restructuring. I immediately promoted the brilliant, hardworking women of color who had been quietly carrying the firm on their backs for years. I doubled their salaries, moved them into the corner offices, and fundamentally reshaped my professional world with the exact same ruthless precision I had used to completely dismantle my biological family. The firm was finally a place of genuine merit and absolute fairness. As the chaotic but incredibly satisfying day came to an end, I decided to take a quiet walk down to the lower floors to visit my old cubicle. I wanted to see the tiny, cramped space where I had spent so many miserable years dreaming of a better life. The desk was empty, but I noticed a small cardboard box shoved deep into the back corner of the bottom drawer. It must have been pushed back there and forgotten during my rushed exit. I pulled the dusty box out and opened the cardboard flaps. Inside, sitting beneath a pile of old office supplies, was a thick, slightly yellowed envelope. I froze, staring at the elegant, familiar cursive handwriting looping across the front. It was an old, unopened letter from my late grandmother. She was the only person in my entire bloodline who had ever truly loved me and supported my independence. I carefully picked up the sealed envelope, feeling a sudden heavy shift in the air, and slowly slid my trembling index finger under the thick paper flap to open it. The heavy paper felt strangely fragile in my hands as I slid my index finger under the sealed flap. I carefully pulled out a folded piece of thick stationery. My grandmother had passed away almost 7 years ago, but seeing her elegant looping handwriting instantly brought her comforting presence back into the room. She was the only person in my entire family who never judged me for choosing a quiet, practical life over flashy social climbing. I unfolded the paper and began to read the faded ink. My dearest Maya, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means you have finally packed up this tiny cubicle and moved on to bigger things. I always knew you were destined for absolute greatness, even when your parents tried to make you feel small. I stopped reading for a second, feeling a tight knot form in my throat. My grandmother knew exactly how toxic Marcus and Patricia were. The letter continued, detailing her deep, profound disappointment in her own son. She watched Marcus and Patricia become completely consumed by their obsession with status and wealth. She knew they were bleeding me dry emotionally and financially to support Chloe and her arrogant husband. But the most shocking part of the letter came at the very end. My grandmother revealed that she had hidden something important from them to ensure my future was protected. She instructed me to take the small brass key taped to the back of the letter and go to the First National Bank in downtown Atlanta. She had maintained a secret safe deposit box under her maiden name for decades. I immediately left the newly restructured office building and told my private driver to head straight to the financial district. The sleek Maybach navigated through the busy Atlanta traffic while I held the small brass key tightly in my palm. When I arrived at the grand marble building of the First National Bank, I bypassed the main teller lines and requested to speak directly with the vault manager. I presented my identification, along with the brass key and the original death certificate I kept scanned on my phone. The manager guided me down a quiet carpeted hallway and into the heavily fortified underground vault. The air down there was cool and perfectly still, smelling of old paper and polished steel. He located the correct box near the bottom row, inserted his master key alongside mine, and turned them simultaneously. The metal drawer slid out with a smooth mechanical click. He carried the rectangular box into a private viewing room and quietly closed the door, leaving me entirely alone. I sat at the small wooden table and took a deep breath before lifting the metal lid. Inside, sitting on top of a faded velvet cloth, was a collection of exquisite, genuine vintage jewelry. There were heavy gold bangles, intricate pearl earrings, and a stunning emerald ring surrounded by flawless, crushed diamonds. But the real treasure was not the expensive jewelry. Tucked underneath the velvet was a small, worn, leather-bound journal. I picked it up and opened the pages. The journal was a meticulous, handwritten ledger, documenting the early years of my father building his supposedly self-made business empire. Marcus had always bragged at dinner parties about how he pulled himself up by his bootstraps and built his fortune through sheer intelligence and unmatched work ethic. He constantly belittled me for not achieving the same monumental success on my own. As I read my grandmother's detailed accounts, the absolute truth finally came to light. Marcus was a complete fraud. The journal contained undeniable proof that my father had secretly stolen his entire initial startup capital directly from my grandmother. He had forged her signature on multiple bank transfers, draining her private savings accounts to fund his first real estate ventures. When she confronted him decades ago, he threatened to put her in a low-income nursing home and cut her off from her grandchildren completely if she ever exposed his theft. My heart pounded wildly against my ribs. My parents were not just arrogant social climbers who made a few bad financial choices. They were calculated criminals who had built their entire affluent lifestyle on a foundation of elder abuse and stolen money. This revelation validated every single instinct I ever had about them. I was not the crazy, bitter daughter they claimed I was. I was the only honest person in that entire toxic bloodline. I reached into the metal box and picked up the vintage emerald ring. I slid it onto my right index finger, feeling the cool metal settle perfectly against my skin. It fit flawlessly. I wore it as a permanent reminder of the woman who genuinely loved me and the vindication I felt in this quiet room. I gathered the journal and the jewelry, securing everything safely inside my designer handbag. I walked out of the bank with my head held high, feeling a profound, undeniable connection to my true ancestry for the very first time. I stepped back into my waiting car and headed straight to my Buckhead penthouse, ready to safely store my newly discovered inheritance. As I walked through the grand lobby of my building, my phone vibrated sharply in my pocket. It was an email notification from my private executive assistant. I opened the message as the elevator doors slid shut. A prominent investigative journalist from a national publication had just reached out to my press team. She had been quietly tracking the aggressive acquisitions made by Phoenix Holdings and the spectacular public downfall of my former family. The journalist was requesting an exclusive sit-down interview. She wanted to do a feature piece detailing my incredible rise to power and the total collapse of the Atlanta elite most notorious family. I looked down at the glowing emerald ring on my finger and smiled a fierce, calculating smile. The world was finally ready to hear my version of the story. 1,000 words. The sleek glass walls of my Buckhead penthouse provided the perfect backdrop for the cover shoot of a premier national business magazine. The investigative journalist who had contacted my team arrived early, accompanied by a small army of lighting technicians and professional photographers. She sat across from me in a plush velvet armchair, her digital recorder resting on the polished marble coffee table between us. I wore a tailored ivory suit, paired exclusively with my grandmother's genuine vintage emerald ring. I sat perfectly still, allowing the bright studio lights to illuminate my flawless composure. I wanted the world to see a woman who had meticulously built her own empire. The journalist leaned forward, her eyes bright with anticipation, expecting me to launch into a bitter, explosive tirade about my disgraced parents and my imprisoned brother-in-law. She wanted the messy tabloid gossip that usually fueled high society scandals and generated cheap internet clicks. I did not give her a single drop of that satisfaction. Instead, I completely controlled the entire narrative from the very first question. I spoke passionately and eloquently about the critical importance of financial literacy for young Black women navigating corporate spaces. I discussed the absolute necessity of establishing impenetrable personal boundaries and learning how to separate emotional family obligation from financial manipulation. I explained how the Vanguard Initiative was deliberately designed to replace toxic family dependency with genuine venture capital support and mentorship. I did not mention Marcus or Patricia by name even a single time during the 2-hour interview. By simply refusing to acknowledge their existence, I effectively erased them from my own success story, rendering them completely and entirely irrelevant to my new reality. The highly anticipated feature article dropped online 2 weeks later, and the public reaction was instantaneous and overwhelmingly explosive. The magazine cover featured a stunning photograph of me standing on my expansive balcony, overlooking the beautiful Atlanta skyline, with a bold, capitalized headline reading, "The Architect of Her Own Freedom." Within 24 hours, the piece went completely viral across every major social media platform. My phone was inundated with notifications, not from angry, demanding relatives, but from thousands of inspired women across the entire country. They shared their own deeply personal stories of escaping toxic family dynamics and breaking free from the suffocating pressure of being the designated family scapegoat. One particularly moving message came from a young college student who stated that my journey gave her the courage to finally cut ties with her financially abusive parents today. I became an overnight symbol of absolute financial empowerment and unapologetic self-reliance. The Vanguard Initiative received an unprecedented flood of applications and enthusiastic financial support from prominent investors who had read the viral article. My conscious decision to focus entirely on lifting up other hardworking women rather than rolling around in the mud with my biological family resonated on a massive cultural scale. I had successfully transformed a personal family tragedy into a monumental national movement. While I was busy inspiring a nationwide conversation, my father was festering in his cramped, noisy one-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. Marcus had purchased a copy of the glossy magazine at a local corner convenience store and spent hours staring furiously at my face on the cover. He stood in the dirty aisle of the store, gripping the magazine so tightly, his knuckles turned white, muttering angry, bitter curses under his breath about my ungrateful behavior. His fragile, narcissistic ego simply could not handle the brutal reality that I had achieved astronomical wealth and global respect while he was completely destitute and socially exiled. Driven by pure spite and profound financial desperation, Marcus decided to make one incredibly foolish move. He reached out to a notorious trashy gossip tabloid known for publishing unsubstantiated celebrity rumors and salacious scandals. He contacted a sleazy reporter and offered them an exclusive, highly lucrative tell-all interview. Marcus shamelessly fabricated a wild, desperate lie, claiming that he was the one who had originally purchased the winning lottery ticket. He told the tabloid that I had secretly stolen the ticket from his coat pocket during that fateful Thanksgiving dinner and used my professional actuarial background to quietly launder the winnings through a complex blind trust. He spun a pathetic, highly dramatic story portraying himself as a hard-working, devoted father who had been ruthlessly robbed by a greedy, manipulative daughter. The tabloid reporter, eager for a scandalous front-page headline, agreed to run the story, but informed Marcus that they needed tangible, concrete evidence before publishing such a massive legal accusation against a prominent billionaire. They explicitly demanded credit card receipts, convenience store security footage, or any physical documentation proving he had actually purchased the winning ticket. Marcus, driven entirely by blind panic and severe delusion, attempted to manufacture the necessary evidence himself. He sat at his tiny stained kitchen table, using cheap computer software to forge fake bank statements and altered digital store receipts. What my desperate father did not realize was that Miss Evelyn Sterling never left a single blind spot unattended. Her elite private investigators were still actively monitoring the digital footprints and financial activities of my relatives to ensure they fully complied with our previous legal agreements. The very moment Marcus attempted to email the forged documents to the tabloid reporter, Miss Sterling intercepted the communication through a flagged server security alert. She immediately marched into my spacious penthouse office and handed me a crisp, printed copy of his pathetic amateur forgery. I looked at the fabricated documents and smiled a cold, predatory smile. My father had just handed me the exact rope I needed to hang him. I turned to my ruthless attorney and instructed her to prepare the ultimate legal hammer to crush this final annoyance permanently. I wanted to absolutely ensure he would spend his remaining years locked in court, battling lawsuits that would completely destroy any miserable future he had secretly planned. Evelyn Sterling did not simply send a standard legal warning letter, she orchestrated a massive financial and legal carpet bombing. Within 2 short hours of intercepting my father's forged documents, a heavily armed team of process servers arrived simultaneously at the corporate headquarters of the trashy tabloid and the dingy apartment where my parents were hiding. The legal package delivered to the tabloid publisher was the size of a thick telephone directory. It contained a meticulously drafted cease and desist order explicitly outlining that Phoenix Holdings possessed unlimited legal funds and would dedicate the next decade to bankrupting their entire publication if they dared to print Marcus's fabricated lottery story. The threat was not vague or empty. Miss Sterling included the intercepted digital logs of Marcus actively forging the bank statements, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the tabloid was entertaining a malicious fraud. The publisher took exactly one terrifying look at the towering stack of hard evidence and the 9-figure net worth of my trust. They immediately dropped my father's story. They blocked his phone number and issued a strict internal memo banning any reporter from engaging with him again. The entire disastrous scheme collapsed before it even reached the printing press. Miss Sterling made it abundantly clear that my empire would fiercely protect its pristine reputation against any desperate, pathetic lies. Across town, Marcus answered a sharp knock at his apartment door. A relentless process server shoved a thick envelope hard into his chest. My father opened the legal documents, his eyes scanning the terrifying language drafted by my ruthless attorney. The papers clearly stated that any further attempts at defamation, public harassment, or fraudulent financial claims against my estate would result in immediate federal litigation. We were fully prepared to seize his meager remaining assets, garnish his future retail wages, and aggressively pursue criminal charges for forgery. As Marcus read the words, the final lingering shred of his false bravado completely shattered. He stood in the poorly lit hallway of his cheap apartment complex, clutching the papers with trembling hands. This was a man who had spent his entire adult life desperately worshipping status, commanding respect through financial intimidation, and wearing his fabricated wealth like an impenetrable armor. Now, he possessed absolutely nothing. No sprawling mansion, no luxury vehicles, no adoring country club audience, and no golden child to proudly parade around. He was just a broke, disgraced old man holding a legal threat that firmly cemented his total irrelevance. He stumbled back into his tiny apartment, collapsed onto a cheap, sagging sofa, and finally wept. He did not cry out of remorse for the years of psychological abuse he had inflicted upon me. He cried because he finally realized he had absolutely zero power left in this world. While our father was crumbling under the crushing weight of his absolute defeat, Chloe was experiencing a profound, quiet reckoning of her own. She was sitting alone in the bleak, windowless break room of the discount retail store, where she now worked exhausting minimum wage shifts. Her feet throbbed in cheap, uncomfortable shoes, and her manicured hands were raw from breaking down heavy cardboard shipping boxes all morning. She was taking her mandated 15-minute lunch break, eating a sad, stale sandwich, when the small television mounted in the corner of the room flashed to a popular daytime talk show. They were broadcasting a syndicated segment discussing my viral magazine interview. Chloe stopped chewing. She stared blindly at the screen, watching me speak eloquently about financial independence, healthy boundaries, and empowering Black women in corporate spaces. In the past, seeing my face on a national broadcast would have immediately triggered a violent, screaming fit of bitter jealousy. She would have hurled nasty insults at the television screen and demanded that my parents buy her something wildly expensive to soothe her wounded ego. But sitting in that depressing break room, surrounded by the harsh smell of cheap floor cleaner and broken dreams, Chloe did not feel a single ounce of jealousy. Instead, she felt the suffocating, heavy reality of her own deeply wasted potential. She realized she had spent her entire life acting as a mindless puppet for our toxic parents, trading her actual independence for a fake luxurious aesthetic that had vanished into thin air the moment Preston's crimes were exposed to the world. For the very first time in her 32 years of miserable existence, Chloe saw me not as a punching bag or a pathetic competitor, but as a genuinely strong woman who had possessed the immense courage to break a toxic cycle she herself had been far too cowardly to escape. She slowly set down her sandwich, pulled a crumpled piece of lined notebook paper from her uniform pocket, and found a blue pen. Chloe began to write. She did not draft a manipulative plea for $1 million bailout. She did not make pathetic excuses for slapping my face or demanding my apartment. She wrote a raw, broken, and painfully honest apology for a lifetime of relentless cruelty. 3 days later, I was sitting at my massive mahogany desk in the Buckhead penthouse, reviewing the latest round of promising venture capital applications for the Vanguard initiative. My private executive assistant walked into the quiet office carrying the morning mail. She respectfully placed a single-hand addressed envelope on the polished marble surface directly in front of me. I recognized the messy, frantic handwriting immediately. It was from Chloe. I picked up the letter, feeling the thin, cheap paper between my fingers, and realized my flawless victory had just presented me with one final, incredibly complicated choice. I traced the jagged ink of my own name written across the front of the envelope. My sister had finally surrendered completely without any conditions or greedy demands. The brutal war between us was genuinely over forever. Now the only question remaining was what exactly I would do with the shattered pieces she left behind. The heavy cream paper felt rough between my fingers as I unfolded the handwritten pages. Chloe had always favored expensive stationery, but the paper she used now was cheap and thin, torn from a basic spiral notebook. I sat at the massive mahogany desk in my Buckhead penthouse and began to read the frantic, messy handwriting. My sister did not start the letter with manipulative demands or arrogant commands. Instead, she began with a raw, pathetic confession that shattered the flawless illusion she had spent her entire adult life protecting Maya. She wrote, "I am so incredibly sorry." The letter was a brutal, deep dive into her miserable reality. Chloe admitted that Preston had been intensely emotionally abusive for years, long before his massive financial crimes ever came to light. He had constantly belittled her, controlled her every move, and threatened to leave her with absolutely nothing if she ever dared to step out of line. She confessed that she only went along with his relentless cruelty toward me because she was absolutely terrified of losing her high society status. She was a coward, trapped in a golden cage, and she had happily thrown me to the wolves just to maintain her fake, luxurious aesthetic. Reading her desperate, broken words sent a complicated, heavy wave of emotion washing over my chest. For 32 years, I had viewed Chloe as an impenetrable wall of pure vanity and vicious arrogance. Now she was completely stripped bare, reduced to a terrified woman working retail and sleeping in a filthy roadside motel. A deep, painful dilemma began to heavily weigh on my mind. She was still my older sister. We shared the same bloodline and the same toxic upbringing. I possessed $150 million and could easily lift her out of poverty with a single phone call. I wrestled with my own empathy, wondering if I should finally extend an olive branch now that she was truly broken and remorseful. I needed professional guidance before making a decision that could potentially drag me right back into a toxic cycle. Later that afternoon, I sat in the calming, sunlit office of my private therapist. I handed her the crumpled letter and poured out my conflicted feelings. I explained the heavy guilt associated with massive wealth and the natural instinct to save a family member who was drowning. My therapist listened quietly, folding her hands in her lap. She looked at me with profound understanding and delivered a single piece of advice that completely rewired my perspective, Maya. She said gently, "You must remember that rescue is not rehabilitation. Throwing money at your sister will only soothe your guilt, but it will completely rob her of the rock-bottom realization she desperately needs to actually heal. You cannot buy character, and you cannot fund personal growth." Her words resonated deeply within my core. I realized that writing Chloe a massive check would not save her. It would just make her dependent on me instead of Preston. I drove straight from my therapy session to the sleek downtown office of Evelyn Sterling. I sat across from my ruthless wealth management attorney and outlined a highly specific, unconventional plan. I told Miss Sterling that I would not contact Chloe. I would not call her, write her back, or ever see her in person again. However, I instructed my attorney to establish a modest, completely locked trust fund under an anonymous corporate name. This trust was not designed to fund a luxurious lifestyle. It was purely a mechanism for basic survival and mandatory healing. I set ironclad, non-negotiable conditions. The anonymous trust would directly pay the motel management to cover a clean safe room for 6 months. It would issue a restricted grocery card that could only be used for basic food items. Absolutely zero cash would ever be handed directly to Chloe. Furthermore, the basic housing and food support were strictly contingent upon her attending intensive weekly therapy sessions with an approved licensed counselor. If she missed a single therapy appointment, the funding would be immediately and permanently revoked. It was a silent grace. I was giving her the fundamental tools to rebuild her shattered mind, but she had to do the actual grueling work entirely on her own. Miss Sterling smiled approvingly, noting that it was a brilliant and highly secure arrangement. With my sister safely compartmentalized into a structured rehabilitation program, I finally felt a profound sense of absolute closure regarding my biological relatives. I left the law office feeling lighter than I had in months, ready to fully immerse myself in the groundbreaking work of the Vanguard Initiative. But the universe has a funny way of pulling you back into the fire, just when you think you have walked away from the flames. I returned to my penthouse late that evening and found my private security detail waiting near the private elevator bank. The head of security approached me, holding a thick, sealed manila envelope bearing the official seal of the United States Department of Justice. He informed me that a federal agent had personally delivered it an hour ago. I carried the envelope into my home office. I broke the seal and pulled out the documents. It was a federal subpoena. Preston was officially going to trial for his massive corporate embezzlement and wire fraud schemes. But the federal prosecutors did not subpoena me as a defendant or a minor character witness. I scanned the terrifyingly formal language of the legal summons. The prosecution team had reviewed the meticulous financial trails I anonymously provided when I bought his toxic debt. They realized I was the only person possessing the mathematical expertise needed to decipher his web of stolen money. They were subpoenaing me to take the stand as the primary star witness for the federal prosecution. I was going to be the one to explicitly testify regarding how Preston embezzled and destroyed the entire estate of my own parents. The heavy oak doors of the federal courthouse swung open, and I stepped inside wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious onlookers, and legal professionals eager to witness the highly publicized downfall of a prominent Atlanta broker. I walked past the wooden pews, my posture immaculate and my expression completely unreadable. I took my seat at the witness stand and placed my hands neatly in my lap. Sitting at the defense table just a few feet away was Preston. He was completely stripped of his custom-tailored Italian suits and his expensive silk ties. He wore an oversized, scratchy orange prison jumpsuit that hung awkwardly on his thinning frame. His face was pale, deeply lined with exhaustion, and slick with cold, nervous sweat. When our eyes met across the quiet room, he glared at me with a toxic mixture of raw hatred and desperate panic. He was no longer the arrogant, white investment broker who thought he owned the world. He was a cornered criminal, and I held the final nail for his coffin. The lead federal prosecutor approached the podium and asked me to state my name and profession for the official record. I leaned toward the microphone and introduced myself as a senior actuary and the chief executive officer of Phoenix Holdings. The prosecutor guided me through the initial questions establishing my credentials before asking me to explain the complex financial web Preston had woven. I did not use confusing legal jargon or dense corporate terminology. I used my actuarial brilliance to effortlessly dissect his massive fraud into simple, undeniable mathematics that every single person on the jury could easily understand. I explained exactly how Preston had secretly siphoned equity from my parents' sprawling mansion, using a series of layered shell companies to disguise the theft as legitimate hedge fund investments. I walked the jury through the meticulous digital trail I had uncovered, showing how those stolen funds bypassed the market entirely and flowed directly into illegal offshore gambling syndicates. I presented the precise dates and wire transfer amounts, proving that the money meant for my parents' secure retirement was actively funding his luxury beachfront condo and his high-maintenance mistress in Miami. The jurors leaned forward in their seats, completely captivated by the clear, undeniable evidence. I spoke with absolute authority, dissecting his entire life of crime with cold, calculated precision. Preston sat at the defense table, furiously shaking his head and muttering under his breath. But the jury was not looking at him. They were looking at the undeniable truth displayed on the screens. When it was time for the cross-examination, Preston sent his high-priced defense attorney to the podium. The attorney was a tall, imposing white man who clearly relied on aggressive intimidation tactics to win his cases. He approached me with a condescending smirk, attempting to completely discredit my professional testimony by attacking my character. He aggressively suggested that I was simply a bitter, jealous sister-in-law holding a personal grudge. He accused me of fabricating the complex financial models just to seek revenge against a successful man because I was unhappy in my own life. I did not flinch or raise my voice. I remained icy and entirely unshakable. I looked directly at the arrogant defense attorney and politely reminded him that math does not hold grudges. I pointed to the bank records displayed on the monitors and calmly challenged him to find a single calculation error in my comprehensive audit. I explained that the offshore routing numbers, the forged signatures on the property deeds, and the direct deposits to the Miami real estate agency were not emotional opinions. They were concrete, federally verified facts. The defense attorney stumbled over his next question, his aggressive facade crumbling under the weight of my flawless logic. His attempts to weaponize his privilege and cast me as an angry, emotional woman failed spectacularly. The jury saw right through his pathetic strategy, and the attorney awkwardly retreated to his seat, completely defeated. The trial progressed rapidly after my devastating testimony. The defense had absolutely nothing left to offer. 2 days later, I returned to the federal courtroom to hear the final conclusion of the miserable saga. The room was suffocatingly tense as the jury foreperson stood up holding the finalized verdict sheet. Preston closed his eyes tightly, his hands trembling violently on the wooden table. The foreperson read the charges: fraud, guilty; embezzlement, guilty; tax evasion, guilty. The word guilty echoed through the quiet courtroom, systematically destroying every remaining shred of Preston and his fake legacy. The federal judge looked down at the broken man from his high bench, expressing profound disgust at the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. He showed zero leniency. The judge delivered a crushing maximum sentence of 15 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. The heavy strike of the wooden gavel sealed his doom perfectly. 2 federal marshals stepped forward and grabbed Preston by the arms, pulling him to his feet. They secured heavy metal handcuffs tightly around his wrists. As they turned him around to march him toward the back holding cells, Preston suddenly stopped. He looked over his shoulder and locked his terrified, desperate eyes directly onto mine. He was looking for any trace of sympathy, or perhaps the quiet, submissive girl he used to bully relentlessly at family dinners. He found absolutely nothing. I sat perfectly still in the front row of the gallery, completely untouchable. I looked at the ruined man in his bright orange jumpsuit and gave him a slight, slow, dismissive nod. It was the exact same arrogant, condescending nod he had given me across the Thanksgiving dinner table, just before my entire life changed forever. Preston's chest heaved with a sudden pathetic sob as the marshals forcefully dragged him through the heavy wooden doors and out of sight. Justice was officially served, but my incredible journey was far from over. The heavy wooden doors of the federal courthouse closed behind me for the very last time, and the crisp Atlanta air filled my lungs. Justice was officially served, but my incredible journey was far from over. I stepped into the bright afternoon sun, feeling a profound sense of relief washing over my entire being. The suffocating chains of my past were permanently severed. Preston was locked inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, facing a 15-year sentence for his crimes. Chloe was strictly adhering to her court-mandated rehabilitation program, quietly living in her cheap motel room and confronting her behavior in weekly therapy sessions. Marcus and Patricia remained completely isolated in their noisy, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city. They were trapped in their own miserable company, permanently exiled from the elite country club circles they had worshipped for decades. I was completely free from their toxic orbit. My bloodline was neutralized, and my future belonged entirely to me. I did not waste another second dwelling on their well-deserved misery. I channeled every ounce of my energy and my immense wealth into building a brand new empire that actually mattered. 6 months after the trial concluded, I decided it was time to officially establish my own legacy in the city. I organized and hosted my very own charity gala, completely transforming the traditional Atlanta social scene. I did not rent out a pretentious, stuffy ballroom covered in meaningless gold leaf and crystal chandeliers. I did not invite the corrupt politicians and the arrogant hedge fund managers who used philanthropy as a cheap networking opportunity. Instead, I rented a massive, beautiful botanical garden right in the heart of the busy city. The space was illuminated by thousands of warm fairy lights strung through the ancient oak trees, creating a breathtaking atmosphere of genuine warmth and authentic community. The guest list for my gala was deliberately and fiercely protected. I invited my chosen family. The brilliant, hard-working women of color from my actuarial firm were sitting at the front tables laughing and sharing stories of their recent corporate victories. My ruthless and brilliant attorney, Evelyn Sterling, was chatting animatedly with the financial compliance officers who had helped me dismantle Preston. But the most important guests of the evening were the hundreds of ambitious young Black women currently receiving full ride scholarships and vital startup funding through the Vanguard initiative. I watched them network with industry leaders and pitch their innovative business ideas with absolute fearless confidence. They were not begging for a seat at the table. They were actively building their own lasting empires. I had successfully replaced the toxic, hyper-competitive energy of my biological relatives with a powerful, supportive ecosystem of women who genuinely wanted to see each other thrive. The evening flowed perfectly filled with joyous music and incredible food. There were no underlying tensions, no whispered insults, and no performative displays of fake wealth. As the dinner service concluded, the soft jazz music faded softly into the background. My best friend Nia walked confidently onto the main stage, wearing a stunning sapphire gown. As the newly appointed executive director of the Vanguard Initiative, she commanded the room with absolute undeniable grace. She tapped her glass with a silver spoon, drawing the attention of every single guest in the lush garden. The crowd fell completely silent, looking up at the woman who had stood by my side when I was just a struggling actuary eating cheap takeout in a tiny apartment. Nia looked directly at me, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure, genuine pride. She spoke beautifully about the incredible journey we had all witnessed over the past year. She talked about the barriers we had shattered, the corporate ceilings we had broken, and the profound impact the foundation was already making across the entire country. She did not mention the ugly, scandalous details of my family. She focused entirely on the magnificent triumph of our shared success. Nia raised her crystal glass high above her head, her voice ringing clear and strong through the quiet night air. "I want to propose a toast," she announced proudly, "to Maya, the brilliant woman who took a crumpled $3 lottery ticket and bought herself the entire world." The entire garden erupted into deafening, thunderous applause. Hundreds of guests stood to their feet, raising their glasses in a beautiful, unified salute. The sound of their genuine love and profound respect washed over me like a warm, healing wave. I felt a few happy tears slide down my cheeks, but I did not bother wiping them away. I slowly stood up from my seat at the center table and smoothed down the fabric of my elegant black evening gown. I walked toward the stage, my heart beating with a powerful, steady rhythm. I was no longer the forgotten scapegoat hiding in the shadows of a toxic Thanksgiving dinner. I was the absolute master of my own destiny. I climbed the short wooden steps and embraced Nia, tightly whispering a quiet thank you into her ear. She handed me the microphone and stepped back, giving me the floor. I turned to face the massive crowd of brilliant, supportive people who had chosen to be part of my new life. I looked out at the sea of smiling faces, the students, the colleagues, and the friends who genuinely valued my mind and my spirit. This beautiful moment was everything I had dreamed of and so much more. I was finally standing exactly where I was always truly meant to be. I took a deep, cleansing breath, letting the cool evening air fill my lungs. The bright fairy lights sparkled above me like a canopy of endless possibilities. I smiled a bright, fearless smile. I raised the microphone high in my right hand, feeling completely ready to deliver the incredibly powerful speech that would permanently define my brand new legacy and close the door on my painful past forever. I stood on the grand stage of the botanical garden looking out at the sea of brilliant, supportive faces. The applause slowly faded into a respectful silence. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of my chosen family fill the space where a lifetime of rejection used to live. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, my voice carrying clearly across the lush garden. "We are celebrating the launch of a foundation that will change the landscape of corporate finance for Black women, but we are also celebrating the absolute power of independence. For 29 years, I was told that my value was tied to my ability to serve others. I was taught that love required sacrificing my peace, my boundaries, and my financial security to maintain a flawless societal illusion. I looked down at the bright young women sitting at the front tables. People ask me what staggering wealth feels like, expecting me to talk about luxury vehicles or corporate power. But that is not what this money represents. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the illuminated trees. Money does not buy happiness. We all know that old saying. But let me tell you exactly what it does buy. It buys the absolute freedom to walk away from those who repeatedly hurt you. It buys the peace of a locked door. It buys the power to look at a highly toxic environment and simply say no without fearing how you will survive the next day. This foundation is designed to give you that exact same locked door. You will never have to shrink yourself to fit into a room that does not respect your brilliance. You will never have to tolerate abuse just to keep a roof over your head. You are the architects of your own empires now. The crowd erupted into a thunderous standing ovation. I smiled, stepping back from the microphone as a profound sense of absolute completion washed over my entire soul. The morning after the charity gala felt entirely different from any other morning of my life. I woke up naturally without the shrill blare of an alarm clock. The heavy silk curtains retracted, allowing golden sunlight to pour across the hardwood floors. I lay in the massive custom bed wrapped in impossibly soft cotton sheets, simply listening to the quiet serenity of my own home. For the first time in my entire existence, I was not rushing out the door to serve an ungrateful boss. I was not bracing my shoulders for a barrage of vicious insults from my mother or condescending remarks from an arrogant brother-in-law. There were no frantic group chat messages demanding money, and no fabricated family emergencies designed to drain my energy. The air in the penthouse was perfectly still and wonderfully light. I slid out of bed and walked barefoot into the massive marble kitchen. I ground fresh espresso beans and brewed a simple black coffee, letting the rich, dark aroma fill the warm space. I did not need to prepare a lavish breakfast for anyone else or worry about maintaining a perfectly curated aesthetic for an ungrateful audience. I was entirely alone, and it was the most beautiful, comforting feeling in the world. I carried my warm ceramic mug through the sun-drenched living room, tracing my fingers lightly along the expensive modern art pieces I had carefully selected for my sanctuary. Every single thing in this massive fortress belonged to me. I walked into my private home office and approached the heavy mahogany desk sitting in the center of the room. The space was meticulously organized, holding the contracts and venture capital agreements that were actively reshaping the Atlanta financial district. But sitting directly in the middle of the desk, positioned where I would see it every single day, was my most prized possession. It was not a diamond necklace or a flashy corporate award. It was a thick, custom-poured block of crystal-clear acrylic. Encased perfectly inside the heavy, transparent block was the original crumpled scratch-off lottery ticket from that fateful Thanksgiving dinner. I reached out and gently traced the smooth surface of the acrylic block. I looked at the $3 price tag printed in the corner and the heavily scratched silver boxes, revealing the matching numbers that had completely altered my destiny. My parents had handed me this exact ticket as a vicious joke. They had intended to publicly humiliate me and remind me of my lowly place in their toxic hierarchy. Instead, they had unknowingly handed me the ultimate weapon of their own spectacular destruction. The cheap piece of paper was a permanent monument to my survival. It represented the exact moment I stopped waiting for their conditional love and finally took absolute control of my own life. I had turned their cruelest insult into a 9-figure empire that they could never touch. I picked up my coffee mug, taking a slow, savoring sip of the dark roast. I walked past my heavy desk and stepped out onto the expansive wraparound balcony. The morning air was crisp and refreshing. I leaned my hands against the cool glass railing and looked out over the sprawling, magnificent Atlanta skyline. Far below me, the city was already bustling with traffic and ambition. I owned the towering skyscrapers and lucrative real estate stretching across the horizon. I had completely neutralized the people who tried to break me, and I had elevated the women who genuinely supported me. There was no lingering anger in my heart, and no bitter desire for further revenge. My biological family was locked in their own miserable reality, while I was busy building a legacy that would last for generations. I took another quiet breath of the fresh morning air, letting the golden sunlight warm my face. I smiled a bright, fearless, and completely unbothered smile. I realized right then and there that the ultimate sweet revenge is simply living beautifully. The ultimate lesson from these profound stories is that your inherent worth is never defined by a toxic family's validation. True independence requires courageously walking away from relentless criticism and rejecting the false narratives designed to diminish your hard-earned achievements. By establishing absolute boundaries and prioritizing authentic happiness, these women proved that genuine success is measured by self-respect, not by appeasing impossible parental standards. Healing truly begins the moment you unapologetically choose yourself and build a beautiful chosen family. Have you ever boldly reclaimed your personal power from toxic relatives? Share your own inspiring journey in the comments below today.